Good afternoon and welcome to Spanish United Radio. I'm your host, Enrique Sanchez. Today we have a very special guest. Would you be kind enough to introduce yourself to the audience, please?
Hi, my name is Buzz Dixon, and I have been a animation, comics, video game, and movie writer for, wow, close to 50 years now.
Welcome. Thank you for being on the show, Buzz.
Thank you.
Yeah, I met you a couple of years ago at the Transformers convention, and I had spoken to you that I'm a fan of the manga called Serenity. You were the one that started the Serenity
I
Buzz
remember, yes,
series.
yes. I remember our
So
conversation. Yeah.
yes, yes. So the reason why I'm bringing you on the show because I am a Hispanic civil rights activist, and what piqued my interest is the character. Aside from Serenity, the main character is Lori Martin. There's not too many Hispanic characters that are in comic books. So before we get to that, explain how you came up with the story of Serenity and what brought you the inspiration of making the character and the series.
Well, I was working at the time as Stan Lee's vice president of creative affairs at Stan Lee Media. I don't know how many of you may be aware of the story of Stanley Media. It turned out unhappily for Stan because he got involved with a guy who was a con artist and caused Stan a lot of problems. But before those problems overtook Stanley Media, um, a guy that Stan knew, a country western performer, producer, guy named Art Greenhaw, who knew Stan, wrote to Stan and said, "Why don't you do with your new company? Why don't you do a Christian comic book?" And Stan looked around, and the only identifiable Christian in the crowd that he could find was me. So he said, "Buzz, can you develop something?" So I came up with several ideas, and one of which was about a group of little kids. I was going to call them the Angel Choir or something like that. It was going to
Hmm.
essentially, my idea was to do like Little Rascals, Our Gang type stories about little kids.
Hmm.
And one of the kids was going to be a troublemaker. And I thought to myself, boy, when she turns 16, she's really going to be a handful. And then bang, all at once, everything about Serenity just came flooding in. And I'm not exaggerating when I say in the next 36 hours, I wrote about 70% of the ideas and characters and everything else that was going to be associated with Serenity over time.
Oh, wow.
Stan was looking for superheroes because that was Stan's bread and butter,
Right.
superheroes. So he decided he didn't want to pursue Serenity. And I said, well, let me take it somewhere else. Just give me the characters and I'll go off and I'll raise my own money and I'll get this done on my own. So Stan was generous enough to let me have these characters that I developed. I went out and I spent, wow, almost 7 years just beating the bushes, trying to get people to pay attention to the idea. And finally, Barber Books, which was a Christian publisher,
Hmm.
picked up on it. And from there, we did originally six or eight. I can't remember off the
Hmm.
top of my head. Anyway, we did several graphic novels with Barber. Then we were picked up by Thomas Nelson, and we did four more volumes with Thomas Nelson. And then Thomas Nelson, you know, their bean counters didn't count enough beans, and they just cut us off without any warning. So
Hmm.
that was the brief but relatively successful run of Serenity.
Yeah, because I remember when I met you at the convention a couple of years ago that
Mm.
originally, aside from the series, you were planning on making it into an animated show, but it never went into fruition.
We never could get any traction on that. Um, and there's a variety of reasons for that, and some of them are just so purely technical that there's no point in going into it. Um, Serenity is not forgotten, let's put it that way. I have been every now and then developing a few ideas to continue the story. It's just a matter of finding the right venue. As you know, right now we are in a very tumultuous time when it comes to graphic media, to comics, to publishing. We're seeing a lot of technical changes occurring very, very fast, and people are just trying to figure out what the market is going to be like. So
Hmm.
I hope to bring Serenity back someday, the whole series. But right now, it's just wait and see.
Because it would be great to actually see it into a into an animated series because from what I got from it, I saw that there was a lot of potential in making it into a series. And aside from the anime series Superbook, which came out back in the 70s, there's not too many anime series that are contemporary Christian that deal with today's issues. And that's something that I would like to see because, it could definitely reach out a lot of people. So two questions, to the series is that I kind of noticed like a resemblance between Serenity Harper and Rei Ayanami Evangelion, and also the character of Laurie Martin. So my question is, was Serenity kind of based on Rei Ayanami Evangelion, and was Laurie Martin a Hispanic character that is of any particular descent, or she's just Chicano or something? Because I'm just curious to know.
Okay, well, yes, there was a certain amount of that from Evangelion. When I was looking to get Serenity off the ground, I hired an artist, Drig Zarbo, who he's a Filipino artist, really, really good artist. And I gave him a handful of anime characters, and I said, not just anime, but a couple of American comic book characters. And I said, do a mock-up cover for me. 16-year-old girl, not, make her look like a real girl. Don't make her look like, some kind of superhero or pinup. Blue hair. And here's a range of character types that, I'd like you to look at and just, somewhere in this range. So he kind of steered a little more towards Evangelion, which, was fine by me because, of course, Serenity dresses and she's not wearing the power suit or whatever it is that is in the series, and is much more, an American contemporary American story. So he did a cover mock-up for me that we then used to go and get interest in the series. Um, he also did, I think, yeah, he did a two-page story, interior story, just to introduce the characters, who was who, and things like that. And as I said, it took several years, even with this, to get even a bite from anybody on it. A lot of people told us it was a wonderful idea. They couldn't wait for us to do it, but they weren't going to do it with us.
Hmm.
But finally, Barber Publishing picked up on it, and we were very successful. We were the best-selling young adult title in the Christian market at that time. So.
Nice. And what about Laurie Martin? Like, what was her inspiration, and what decided to include her in the series? Because, like I mentioned, there's not too many Hispanic characters, even if they're supporting characters in series today. They tend to be like side characters.
Well, I wanted it to reflect, a modern contemporary high school. Um, my older daughter, no, excuse me, strike that. My younger daughter was in high school at that time. Um, she was um, in Hollywood High. She was in the theater arts program there, and I knew from going to the performances that they did and stuff like that, it was a very much a mixed school. And I knew that that was the direction that American culture was heading in anyway. So I figured just make as diverse a group of characters as possible. So, besides Lori, who is Hispanic, she's of Mexican descent.
Hmm.
Beside Lori, we have uh, Tim and Sally. They're African American.
Hmm.
We have Kimberly, who is an adoptee. She is Korean, but she was adopted as an infant, so she
Hmm.
is thoroughly Americanized. She has no Korean cultural touchstones in her, so to speak.
Right.
And that was going to figure, eventually, it was my hope, that was going to figure into a storyline where she's trying to figure out, who am I? Where did I come from? You know, am I American or am I Korean American? What am I?
Hmm.
Um, and then of course Serenity, and we had Derek, and trying to remember the other young man who was,
Eddie.
excuse me,
Eddie, I believe his name was
Eddie.
Eddie. He
That's
was like a
right. You're
redheaded guy.
absolutely right. Excuse me, Eddie. And Eddie was representing like rural America. He was a farm kid who went to the same school, and the premise was that these characters were all members of what was called the Prayer Club, which was
Hmm.
a before school group that would meet just before the school opened, and they would have a little private prayer meeting, and they, seeing Serenity was kind of an outcast in the school when she came there, they just made her basically their project, and
Hmm.
they were determined to be friends with her, even if she didn't want to be friends with them. And eventually, they win her over, and their influence has a positive effect on her, and she becomes a Christian herself.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah, that.
Lori's
Yeah, go ahead. I'm
background, as I
sorry.
said, she's Mexican American. Her grandfather came to the U.S. Um, so her parents and herself have been born in the U.S. And she's a typical American kid. She's not unaware of her heritage, but I mean, she just blends in with every other kid in the school.
Hmm.
Um, and that was kind of what I was trying to do, show that there was a commonality, even though people came from different backgrounds and whatnot.
Hmm. Yeah, one of the reasons why I asked, because Spanish United, we are a civil rights organization for Hispanic people. We started about 5 years ago, and one of the things that
Mhm.
we do is that aside from outreach, is that we try to present and educate people on a positive representation of Hispanic people. Let it be in
Mhm.
personal relationships, individual relationships, or let's just be in the media or in public life. So I really think, especially at that time, when you created the character, I thought it was a positive representation because I've seen other characters of Hispanic characters back then in comics that they were either based on stereotypes or they were not a realistic representation of a character that it represents the Hispanic community. So I thought that was a very interesting concept. And another question is that a lot of people have always asked, is the character Laurie LGBT or is just left ambiguous? Because in some of the pages it kind of says that, but that's not really is not mentioned specifically in detail.
At Barber's request, we did not make it overt, but we did drop the clues in there. I have a story that if we when we bring Serenity back, Lori's going to come out to her friends. She's going to bring them together, and she says, I've got something really important I've got to tell you. And she'll say, I'm gay. And
Hmm.
Sally goes, and? And they've all picked up on it. They all recognize this, but they just went, well, so what? She's gay. Let her live her life. She doesn't need people commenting on it.
Hmm.
And that's one of the things that I wanted to bring across was that I think there are far too many judgmental people in various denominations. Let's just put it that
Mhm.
way.
Mhm.
And to me, that's counter to what the message of Christ was all about. So I just wanted to bring out that, people are what they are, accept them for who they are. Don't try to force change on anybody. Um, Serenity becomes a Christian not because anybody twists her arm, but because she sees that her friends seem to have a better life than she does. And when she starts applying some of Christ's teachings in her home, with her mother, she finds out all of a sudden life gets better.
Mhm.
There's not as much confrontation, there's not as much fighting and whatnot.
Yeah, that's
Um,
one thing that I like, that at the end of the series she becomes Christian at the end, and it has a happy ending, and that's
yeah.
something that really resonated with me, that even though she went through all these trials and tribulations and she kind of did things that were kind of that most people wouldn't forgive, but at least she was able to change for the better. And another thing that I noticed in the last book was that when she did a radical change, even her friends got concerned, because a lot of people believe that when someone becomes Christian, that automatically they have to be conservative and plain and not have a personality. And that's one thing that I like, that even though she did change and become Christian, she reverted back to her old physical appearance,
Mhm.
but she became more refined. And that's good, because like you mentioned, the many dominations today, they focus so much on appearance and not by what person's character is. Like Jesus
Oh,
said,
yeah.
it's what the inside that matters, not the outside.
Exactly. I mean, I'm acutely aware of that. There are some denominations where you can look at the church and it's like they're practically wearing a uniform
Right.
because you got to dress this way, you got to do this, you got to do that. And as my feeling is, as long as you are not doing anything in your personal life that harms another person. You want to dye your hair blue, go ahead and dye it blue. You want to wear pajamas to school, wear pajamas to school. It doesn't matter. As long as you are not causing problems for somebody else, just let people be. Excuse me. And that's one of the things that I'm trying to get across. I mean, conversely, Eddie, I don't know how many people might have picked up on this. Eddie is a horn dog.
Yes.
And he's been, you know, um, he's been having brief flings with young ladies left and right, and he kind of realizes that's not right, but he keeps succumbing to temptation.
Mhm.
Um, One of the things I'll spoil it for people because as I said, when we get this up and running again, I want to do this story. One of the story arcs I had planned was a large influx of Mexican American, Hispanic American students into the school. The school merges with another district,
Mhm.
and all of a sudden there's this very pronounced large segment of students who are of Hispanic, predominantly Mexican American background.
Mhm.
And Serenity actually, at this point in the story, would become kind of a mediator between the two groups because having grown up in Los Angeles, she's picked up enough Spanish off the street that she's able to talk with them. She's able
Right.
to relate to them and whatnot.
Right.
And so she would be kind of, helping smooth things over. But Eddie was going to find a young lady that would be, the one intended for him, so to speak.
Mhm.
And he would find this young woman who had her own problems and issues. And the two of them, realize we have problems and issues because we've been looking for the right person. And
Right.
here we found the right person, so they would bond at that point.
Well,
Um,
that would definitely be great to
yeah,
especially attract Hispanic readers, especially
yeah,
tweens and teenagers, because like I
yeah,
mentioned, it will be
yeah,
able for them to relate to the characters and to the stories and issues that they go through.
right. I was a big fan of the original run of the Love and Rockets series. And I know this was set in Central America, not Mexico, but the Palomar stories in it were always very evocative. And then Hopi and Maggie's stories as well. And granted, those are those are not what we would call Christian stories, obviously, but
Right.
they seemed they had a reality to them, a solidness that to me really resonated, and I was really interested in those characters and stories in their initial run. I wanted to have something like that, something that would reflect, the however you want to refer to it, the Spanish American, the Latino American, the Hispanic American, however you want to say it. I wanted something that would help reflect that experience. Um, and obviously, I always do a lot of research and I check with people because I never want to, to use an expression somebody once said, put on my clown shoes and go stomping around and inadvertently alienate people by not getting my stories right, my facts right.
Right.
So I was going to be doing a lot of research on that, further research. But ironically enough, after the Serenity series stopped, my younger daughter and her husband adopted three young kids who were, taken, her, their mother and her mother's family were unfortunately drug addicts,
Hmm.
but they were taken by Child Protective Services, and my daughter and her husband adopted all three of them. And they're college students now. One's in high school. The one that's in high school is on the Nevada State Girls Champion Bowling League. Okay.
Hmm.
So I mean,
That's impressive.
it's a very broad experience. It's not the stereotype, is what I'm saying.
Right.
And so I use their experiences and the things they've gone through because they've read the books and they love them and they keep asking me, when are you going to do more? Um, I wanted to use some of their experiences too in reflecting how kids are growing up today in all sorts of cultures.
Right. Hey, if you need some feedback, I could definitely provide some feedback, especially when it comes to what the Hispanic youth are going through today, because I deal a lot with Hispanic youth.
If if I can get traction on this, and because um, I have tried to get it up and running again, and it is just, as I said, a very tumultuous time as far as graphic novels and things like that go. Um,
Do you
I
think?
want to do it. It's
Mhm.
just a matter of finding, the opportunity to do it.
Right, right. And when the series came out years ago, were there opposition within the Christian community on how Serenity dealt with themes, or do you think?
Oh yeah, yeah. We got some of the weirdest feedback. Um, there's one story, I think it's either the second or third book in the series, where Serenity is trying to poach Kimberly's boyfriend, Derek. We've
Right,
got, for those who may not be familiar with the series, um, there's a triangle, kind of like the Archie, Veronica, Betty triangle.
right,
It's
right,
it's Derek. his
Serenity and Kimberly.
girlfriend Kimberly and Serenity, who's got designs on Derek. And she was trying to seduce him by asking him to come over to her house and help her with her, algebra homework, I think it was. And we showed her getting ready, putting on, some short shorts and a halter, and she was going to put the moves on him. But of course, he's a decent kid. He says, "No, wait a minute. I came over here to help you with your homework. I'm not gonna go and do something behind Kimberly's back."
Right.
He's split. Well, we had one guy just blow a cork over the shot of, and mind you, the panel is just it's Serenity's feet as she's stepping into the shorts.
Right.
You don't see anything other than just she's holding them and she's stepping into them. And he blew a gasket on that. It punched some button that he had, and he just went bonkers.
Wow.
And we had a lot of trouble with that guy on it. We had a couple of places refuse to carry it because in the first book, I wanted to be realistic, but at the same time, I knew there were limits to language. So we created this kind of, it looked like one of those embossed plastic labels that you used to have,
Right.
and it just said censored. And so it looked like we had stuck censored labels over all these things that Serenity was saying.
Right.
And then, of course, her friends break her of that habit in the first book. But I realized we have to address it so that people, if they ever say, "Hey, how come she doesn't sound like a real teenager?" Well, she used to, but then they made her clean up her act. Um, and we had people get upset about that. Well,
Hmm.
you're saying dirty things here. And I said, no, no, no. It's a joke. It's a label to indicate she said something bad, but we don't say what she said bad. And just
Right.
the fact that we alluded to her saying something bad was too much for
Right, right. And I thought
him.
that was extreme because I remember a couple years ago, the Christian band POD came out with a self-titled album, and the album had a cover kind of like the Virgin Mary, but kind of like in the old style,
Uh-huh.
like kind of like the Los Muertos. But it started a lot of controversy that in many Christian stores they wouldn't even carry the album just because of the cover, and the cover was even asked to be changed. But
Yeah.
I understand where many people take something that's supposed to mean something as a metaphor, but then people take it out of context. But I think a lot of it has to do with education, and I think it's very important that when people are uneducated on what certain themes or matters mean, then people would have a better understanding because not everything is obscene.
No. And the truth is, if this is a thing that amuses me about a lot of people who claim to read the Bible. And to me, I don't think they really read it. I think they skim through it. They have a couple of verses they like, but they've never really read it and understood it. Paul gets, he gets pretty salty on occasion.
Hmm.
He in one time talks about a rival in the Christian community, and he basically says, "I hope they cut his balls off."
Right.
Uh, you know, I mean, so it this is again, it's a customary thing that we have. The word dung, dung today in the 21st century is it's an acceptable word. If you said there was, some cow dung in the field, people would go, okay, well, that's all right to say that. It was not acceptable in the time of King James.
Right.
It was used for shock value in the King James Version of the Bible. People don't realize that. But because it was used in the Bible, very quickly it became, oh, well, if it's in the Bible, it must be okay. and people began using the word,
Right, right.
in quote polite company unquote.
Right, that makes a lot of sense. Like I remember, I think it wasn't like in the first volume, like the prayer club were concerned about Trinity's language. And I
Yeah.
remember Sally was mentioning to Tim that the N-word is pretty horrible, but Tim said it's not obscene. So like where did that come from?
Well, that's another thing that we were tackling. And again, I wanted to head off certain issues so that if anybody brought them up, how come you don't mention this? I could say, well, we did allude to it at this point. I know a number of African American people who very flatly say we don't use that word. We know other African Americans use it, and we're not happy with that. We don't use it. I mean, one person said, "Why would I use a word that was the last thing some of my ancestors heard before they were murdered?"
Right,
And I thought to myself, yeah, I there's no point in raking open a sore wound, so to speak. So we did that allusion to it, Tim saying that and Sally responding. So if anybody in the future said, well, how come this word isn't used? Well, we discussed that. We had our characters know the word and they also understand the pain behind it, and they just don't want to be involved with that.
right, right. Yeah, I actually thought that was a very interesting clip because, like I said, even in mainstream Christian media, for some reason, especially among evangelicals, they don't really like to talk about the issue of racism, not just with African Americans, or right now with Hispanic people when it comes to immigration. So I think, when you bring up the series later on in the future, like this is just a pitch I could give to you that if you could
Mhm.
bring up like issues of immigration and what Hispanics have to deal with, having to deal with an identity, because many Hispanics were not monolithic. We are a mosaic, so Hispanics could be of any race, but Hispanic just refers to anyone that comes from a Hispanic background or that they speak Spanish. So if you could put that into one of your future books, that would be great
I
to address that issue as well.
If we get around, if we get Serenity off the ground again and we start doing the merging of the two school stories, that will definitely pop up. There's a comic strip called Baldo, which is about a Mexican American family. And a few years ago, they did a really funny but poignant Sunday strip where the father, who looks like what people expect a Mexican American, man would look like, goes to the park to meet a couple of his friends who are also Mexican American, one of whom is blonde, the other one is black. And while they're talking, one of them has a radio playing, and they hear a police report that they're on the lookout for a Hispanic man. And the three of them look at each other like, what do you mean by that? I mean, we're all Hispanic, and when you say that word, what are you trying to conjure up in someone's head?
Hmm.
So I wanted to touch on that. Yeah. You know, with Kimberly, she I did not envision her, or I should say, I do not envision her ever connecting completely with her um, Korean heritage. She was brought over as an infant. Everything that she knows growing up has been purely American.
Right.
And ironically, Serenity is much more fond of Korean food than Kimberly will be. But I wanted to bring that up, that who are we? Where do we come from? Sometimes we connect with our cultures that we come from. Sometimes we don't.
Mhm.
Um, you know,
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think that, with the story, I think that you'll be able to reach out to different communities, and at the same time, you'll be able to reach it out, about morals, and not necessarily, preachy, but people can relate to it and say, hey, this could apply to me. And anyway, I wanted to say, I'm looking here on my timer that I have a minute left, but I wanted to tell you, Buzz, thank you so much for being on the show. To all of my listeners, we are on all social media platforms. We are in Spanish United, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, now known as X, Instagram, and anyone that wants to reach out to us, feel free to do so. We are a nonprofit organization. Anything that anyone donates will be given to help anyone in the community, doesn't matter if you're Hispanic or not. And again, I want to tell you, Buzz, thank you for being on the show. I will send you the link to Instagram so you could share with all of your
Great.
colleagues.
Thank you. Thank you.
Likewise, have a good day. Give me one
You
second.
too. Thank you very much for having me.